All right, here we go. Okay, welcome to day 3 of Lambda School's JavaScript ES6 mini bootcamp. So we're covering the fundamentals of JavaScript, just starting basic and going up, and we're doing everything in ES6. So it's a lot of the newer ES6 features come into play when we start talking about functions and objects and things like that. So there's a little bit right now that's different from traditional JavaScript, but a lot of that newer ES6 stuff really comes out and presents itself when we get into objects and functions, and we'll be doing more of that later this week. But yeah, today's a fun day. Today we are going over arrays. So we've talked about like variables, and we've talked about if statements and for loops, and some of that control flow stuff. And today we are essentially learning about a new type of value that we can store in our variables. And yeah, so let's dive in. It should be great. All right, if you have questions, ask them in a questions channel. Oh yeah, this is also this is our pre-coursework. So this is the stuff that we expect our students to know by day 1. So we start at a fairly high level and we move fast. So it's we're gaining the reputation for being a pretty difficult class, and very, very challenging, but it's great because our students learn a ton and they reach a very, very high level. They achieve a pretty strong level of competency very, very fast. And so it's exciting to see the progress, exciting to see how fast they learn. And anyway, if you're interested in applying, we'd love to see your application. We don't charge anything until you have a job making more than $50,000 a year. At that point, you pay us back 70% of your salary as long as you have a job. If you lose your job for whatever reason, the payments will stop. And it's essentially we like to think that we're creating a more ethical, more friendly form of a student loan, something where our incentives are aligned with yours, to where we succeed as a school and as a company as our students succeed. And the better our students do, the better we do. The payments are also capped at $30,000. So, if you sign our agreement and then win the lottery, you're not going to pay us back 30% of, or 17% of what you're making. You're going to pay us back just a cap up to $30,000. So, so I think it's just a more ethical form of a student loan payment. And I've had a lot of interest. We are in Y Combinator, which is an incredibly selective startup accelerator. Been able to raise some money from some pretty prestigious investors, and things are going great. We have a lot of students, and we have some great instructors from Berkeley and NASA, Stanford, and have some AAA game developers. So pretty fun stuff. So love to have you come in and check out what we're doing. All right, so let's dive into arrays. Okay. All right. So we're gonna. I'm gonna. My REPLs. I'm creating a new REPL real quick. All right. JavaScript. Oh yeah. In case you're curious, JavaScript is very, very different from Java. Make sure I got my Slack open, and I am so Austin can message me when I'm not zoomed in enough or I'm talking too quietly or something like that. So he kind of gives me little updates as we're going along. So I'm watching the questions channel in the Lambda School Slack team. So if there's any of you that are in the Lambda School Pro team, the ones that are like if you're enrolled in our upcoming CS4 class, make sure that you're in the other Slack team. Okay. All right, here we go. So arrays. So we've gone over a couple different types of variables. So we have our const. We have like numbers. Let's see. Boolean values. My name's Ben. So we've covered a couple different types here, where we have we have numbers, we have bools, we have we have strings. Some other ones. We can also have we can also set things to undefined. So some value that will be set in the future. That's too long of a variable name, but just kind of showing you how like we write our variables in camel case, keep the first letter always lowercase. We call this camel case because there's lots of humps. There's other ways you can write it, like there's like snake case, which is used in some languages and some formats, but generally in JavaScript everything is camel cased. So and we try to keep the variable names consistent with the data that they're holding. So that's fine. But then for a bool, the variable name is something that could be true or false. So is happy. And that could be true or false. And so the variable name is kind of descriptive, and just by looking at it, an experienced developer can look at that and infer that the value that's in that variable is a bool. So like later, if it's referenced down below, they can see, okay, that's probably going to be a Boolean value. Okay, so these are all single values. But what happens if we have a name and we want it to reference a bunch of different values? So that's where arrays come in. So I'm going to call this nums. So notice how this is plural. Okay. All right, so notice how this is. So we have const num is equal to 5. This one we're going to call it nums. We're going to pluralize the name. That doesn't break anything in the code, but that's generally the convention. It makes it a little easier to follow along with the code later on. And then we define our array with these brackets, square brackets. These are on the right side of your keyboard above the enter key. So it's kind of like we just made a little container, and now we're going to fill it up with some different numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now the name nums, the variable nums, when I reference it down below, it's going to refer to all of those values that have been grouped together in that order. So their order is important, and they are in this fixed little bucket of values. So this is an array. This right here this is how we declare and define an array. This is the best way to create an array. And so we use const when we are creating variables that reference arrays. Anyway, and you'll probably have some questions about that in a little bit, but we'll return to that in a moment. So, all right, so it's essentially, the idea behind an array is it's a collection of values that we want to be able to group together under a single name, and we want to be able to pass that around. So super common type of, like one of the most common structures or formats that you're working with in JavaScript is an array of objects. We're going to talk a lot about objects tomorrow and how they're different from arrays. Whether they're actually the same thing under the hood, but so arrays are just have a bunch of different values in them, in order. So let's now, I'm going to talk about some different methods and some different aspects of arrays, like how do we get things out of an array, how do we add things into the middle, how do we add things onto the end, etc. So now let's do ice cream flavors. So we'll make that plural. So I see someone just posted a screenshot talking about a question probably relating to one of the homework problems. This will not be, I'm not going to be talking as much about homework problems right now. This is specifically just going to be focused on like the array stuff. So if you have questions about the homework from yesterday, maybe at the end I can take a few minutes to talk about that. But for right now, we're going to be just focusing on the next topic. Okay, so ice cream flavors, and so let's do hazelnut, chocolate, and then blueberry. Okay, so I have a couple different flavors of ice cream here inside of this array, and now we can access these. So now that we've created the array, we can access these. We can access these items out of the array based off of their index or based off of the position that they occupy within the array. So something I can do now is, so if I wanted to do console.log, and let's say I wanted to access the first item in the array, I can go ice cream flavors. I'm going to put some brackets, and I'm going to put a 0 in there, and then that's for the first item in the array. So this first item inside of the array is the 0th item. Then this one is the first item, second item, or the item at index 0, index 1, and index 2. Arrays start at index 0. The first item is always index 0. They are 0 based. This is something a little bit different that you'll have to get used to in programming, but things are often they often start at an index of 0. So 0 is the first item, 1 would be the second item, and then 2 would be the third item. So ice cream flavors at index 0, and we see hazelnut is printed out. And so this 0, this goes in. This is kind of like an expression. It's kind of like saying 2 plus 2. It's an expression that needs to be evaluated. And this part that's highlighted will evaluate to the first item in the array, or the item at the 0 index. So I could also say const first flavor is equal to ice cream flavors at index 0 like that. And then now I could say first flavor like this. So we're going to, so essentially the way this reads, we have an array of these strings, which are ice cream flavors, and then we're going to reference the first ice cream flavor in the array and assign it to the variable first flavor. We are then going to log out that, that value. So if we run this, we'll see hazelnut. If I pass an index 1 here, we're going to see chocolate. If I pass index 2 here, we're going to see blueberry. If I do index 3, we see undefined, because there is no index 3. There is nothing in the third index inside of the array. Okay. All right. Let's see. John's asking, what are the different ways of declaring empty arrays? We'll go over that in just a moment. Yeah, I'll go to that too a little bit when we start talking about push and pop and shift and unshift and how to add items into an array and how that works. So, all right. So again, we access it with the index. It's a number. Okay. All right. So now every array also has a length property on it, which gives us the number of items that are inside of the array. Okay. So if I run this, it's going to print out 3. There are 3 items inside of the array. So ice cream flavors.length is 3. So so you might be thinking, like, why do I need this length property right here? There are 3 items, obviously, in the array. Usually when you're programming, you don't have the creation of the array in the same file where you're working with it. Often the creation is happening, maybe it's on the server, and you're getting an array of something back from the server, and so you're just having to iterate through it. You don't know the length of it beforehand, or it's being dynamically generated somehow, so you're not going to have the actual length beforehand. So length property, this is one of the most important parts of an array that we're going to be using a lot, is the length, so we can know how many items are inside of it. Okay. All right, we can dynamically push things, and we can modify an array at runtime. So after we have the array, we can go in and modify it. So let's say later on in our program, let's say we have some type of user input that's giving us a new array, or a new ice cream flavor we want to add to the array. And so we're going to add in strawberry. So we have push, which is very, very common with arrays. It's like push and pop are 2 of the most common methods you're going to be using. So push, we're just going to add strawberry onto the end of the array. We're going to log out all the ice cream flavors, and now we see hazelnut, chocolate, blueberry, and strawberry. So we see the 4 different flavors are now inside of the array. So if I do length here, you can see that there are 4 items inside of the array. Okay. All right, so I can do ice cream flavors.push strawberry, and then now if I do ice cream flavors.pop, see that the length is 3. Again, we see hazelnut, chocolate, and blueberry are in there. So what the pop does, the pop removes the item off of the end of the array or the right side of the array. So pushing and popping, pushing, you're pushing it onto the array, popping, you're taking it off the end of it. These are very, very common. This is allows you to mimic a stack data structure, which is something that we go into in quite a bit of depth in the course. That's one of the first simple data structures that we teach. Data structure is just it's the science and the theory behind how you structure your data in your programs. Different data and different structures and formats. There's different trade-offs. So some are better in some cases, and others are better in other cases. So I'm not going to go into that right now, but we're just going to just mainly focus on arrays because this is one of the built-in common data structures in JavaScript. So yeah, so why can you const an array? Yep, I figured this question would come up right about here. So you might be thinking, okay, so if I do const on the ice cream flavors, and then I have an array here. So const should mean that I can't change it, but then here I did a push and then a pop, and there were no errors. It didn't change that I edited it. So this gets into a more advanced concept that we hit on a lot more in the course, but the difference is that const means that the variable name cannot change what it refers to in memory. So let me see if I can draw with this. Let me actually let me try this. Maybe I can let's see. Usually we use a different video software that has a simple way for me to be able to draw. Shoot. Okay. Well, I think I might have to pass on that. So, so essentially, what's going on is we have a. Let me just. There's just something simple. Sketchpad. Yeah, there's some little like sketchpad. This is probably it. So. Cool. All right. This is perfect. Okay. So, if on your computer, so if let's say we have so you have const x is equal to, and then right here, this is something in memory. So we have this this block. So your memory, you can kind of think of it as like on your computer, like your RAM. You can kind of think of it as like this big, long thing with a bunch of kind of cells where we can have bits of pieces of information. So with const, what we're doing is we're saying that the variable cannot change what it's pointing to. So let me see if I can. Let me see if I can clear this out real quick. Well, okay, let's. Sorry about this. Let me refresh. There we go. Okay. So, all right. So let's say that this triangle is a variable, and this square is an object in memory that it's pointing to. So this right here is we're saying const. So this right here represents our variable name, and this right here represents the value. So, so our variable points to this value, and with a const, what we're saying is if we try to reassign the variable to something else, this right here is not allowed. So this is bad. So we cannot change what the variable points to. But what we can do, though, is with an array, the reason why it's valid with an array is because if this right here is represents the array in memory, we're actually modifying the array in memory. So we're adding, if these little circles are items inside of the array, we're adding them to that that underlying object in memory. And so, and I don't want to dwell on this too much. This is getting into a pretty advanced concept here, but this is important for understanding how const works with arrays and objects. But so we're modifying the array, but we're not changing the reference. And so this is legal. With numbers and strings, if I do, so like if the variable is equal to the number 1, and if I increment it, so if I do plus plus, what it's actually doing is it's actually overwriting the reference. It's creating a 2 in memory, and it's changing the reference to the 2, and that's bad. We can't do that. And so that's why we have to use let with numbers, and if we were to do it with a string, it's doing the same thing. So if this is hi, and we wanted to add an exclamation point onto the end of it, so we did a plus on an exclamation point, then what it's doing is it's creating a separate string in memory that is hi, and it changes the reference to point to it. By reference, I mean the variable name. So the variable name can also be referred to as a reference, and so that's bad. And so objects and arrays, and objects, we'll talk about this tomorrow, we'll also use const with them, are different because you're not actually changing the reference, you are modifying the underlying object or the underlying data. And so that's very different, very unique. That leads into some very unique considerations when it comes to programming. But this is a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So if your eyes glossed over the last 5 minutes, don't worry about it. This is more in depth stuff that we're gonna go over later. But yeah, so anyway, so that's what's going on there. So the reference cannot essentially the reference cannot be changed. So that's the way you can think of it. So all right, so push and pop, adding things onto the end of it, onto the right side. We can also do shift and unshift. So we can do ice cream flavors dot unshift. And so let's add in banana. And so if we run this out, banana has now been added onto the left side or the front of the array. So unshift adds it to the left, and then flavors dot shift removes it from the left. So right here, we are creating an array with hazelnut, chocolate, and blueberry. We add an item onto the right, a strawberry, and then we remove it. And then we do unshift so we add banana to the left, and then we remove it. And then we print out ice cream flavors, and it will look exactly the same as it does up here. So shift and unshift are on the left side, push and pop are on the right side. These are some of the most common ones. There's others that are important that we'll go over more in depth during the course, and some different methods like for each and map and reduce and sort and some stuff like that that lead into some more advanced behaviors. But that's beyond what we want to talk about right now. So all right, so now we have these flavors of ice cream, these strings inside of our array. So now let's print them out. So let's say that we want to loop out this array in turn. So instead of just printing out the entire array like this, let's say we want to print out hazelnut, chocolate, and blueberry. So we want to write a for loop to iterate over the array. This is an incredibly common programming task. You have an array of something and you're looping over it, or you're iterating over the collection or over the array. This is super, super, super common. This type of a thing happens all the time. And so we're going to make an array or a for loop that's going to run in such a way that it will allow us to access each item inside of the array in turn. So we're going to do for let I get 0, I less than ice cream flavors dot length I plus plus. Okay. So this right here, this is like 95% of the time when you write a for loop, you're going to be writing it to go over an array. Initially. Eventually, there's a little helper method we'll show you that kind of it's called a for each method on the arrays, and that's generally considered preferable to this later on when you get more advanced. But for right now, this is the way to iterate over arrays. So with this for loop, again, we have our counter variable that's going to be starting at 0. This is good because arrays are at a 0 index. And then we are going to, and then this is our truth statement, our truth condition here. And as long as I is less than the length of the array, and the length of the array is 3. So there's 3 items in the array. And so this right here will be the number 3 when we run this. And then I is going to be incremented by 1 each time we go through. So what's going to happen is I is going to be equal to 0, then 1, then 2. So 0, 1, and then 2. And the thing about that is that 0 is going to be the index for this item, 1 is the index for this item, and 2 is the index for this item. So what we can do here is we can say console.log ice cream flavors at index I, and I pass in a variable here. Instead of just passing in a number, I'm actually passing in the letter I, the variable I, which we created right here. And so as I run this, we see hazelnut, chocolate, and blueberry all print out. Each string is printed out in turn with each iteration of the loop. So you can pass in variables there. If I just put in a 0 here, the for loop's going to run 3 times, but it's just going to print out the first item each time. If I just did a 1 here, it's going to print out chocolate 3 times. If I put in a 2, it's going to print out blueberry 3 times. But if I put in I, because I is the variable that's changing with each cycle of the for loop, I is the variable that changes. And so if I run that, then we see hazelnut, chocolate, and blueberry all print out. And so this right here, again, is a very, very common type of task where you're starting from the left of an array and you're iterating to the right-hand side. Okay. All right. So now let's do another example. Let's say Const test scores. All right. So test. All right, so here's a bunch of test scores in our array, just a bunch of numbers. Now let's say that we want to write a function, or we'll not do it as a function yet. We'll be doing stuff like that later in this week, but right now we're just going to have a for loop and we're going to iterate over the test scores array. And let's say that we want to give everyone 5 points of extra credit. So these are their test scores. Now we're all of our students did something. We're now going to give them all 5 points of extra credit. So we want to increase each one of these scores by 5 points, by 5. So how can we do that? We could write this out manually. Test scores 0 is equal to 60. You could do something like that. We say test score 60 is like, we do like this plus 5, which it's kind of silly, and this is getting pretty hard coded. And at this point, you could go in and just like change it in the array. But let's do it with a for loop. So I was going to start at 0, I less than test scores dot length I plus plus. Right over the array like this. So now what we can do is, let's say test scores at index I plus equals 5. Now let's do the log test scores. I think that should work. Actually, I might need to switch that a little bit. But if we run that, that worked great. So plus equals. Again, plus equals is identical to saying test scores. These two lines are identical. That's what the plus equals again. This is a reminder from yesterday. So test scores plus equal 5. So we're going to add 5 to each item in the array. So this is starting to get a little, this is getting a little tricky, a little more complex. Type of a thing that we're doing here, but this is very, very common. One of the biggest areas of improvement that our new students need when they come into our course is practice writing for loops over arrays. That is such a common task, and that's probably the biggest area that that our new students could have studied a little bit more on, and we're adding some more prep work questions to to help with that. But this type of a thing, you'll be doing this almost every day in our class. So all right, so we have an array, and then we iterate over it. So I is starting at 0. So I starts at 0. I less than test scores dot length, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this right here will be 5 when this is running. So I is equal to 0, and then length is 5. And then as we go through, we're going to say, all right, test scores at I, and so I is going to start at 0. And so essentially we're going to say I'm going to copy this. I'm going to kind of walk through this as though like we're seeing this happen in real time. But, so essentially, we're going to have test scores at index 0. So it's going to go grab the first item. And then we're going to say, all right, plus equal 5. So add 5 to it, increase it at that location. And so it's going to add 5 to it. And then we finish. We come back up. I is increased to 1. We run through again. All right, test scores in index 1 plus equal 5. So 45 becomes 50. And then I is increased to 2. I is increased to 2. So so 0, 1, 2, the item at the second index, 60, we increase it by 5, so it's 65. We come through, I is increased to 3. This is 3. So then, 0, 1, 2, 3. So 80, we increase it by 5, 85. We increase it to 4. 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the last item, we increase it by 5. All right, then we come back up. I is increased to 5. So I and the length are now the same. And if you look at our truth condition here, I is 5. So is 5 less than 5? It's not. They're the same. And so this returns false. The for loop breaks and finishes. And then we come down console.log test scores. The test scores array items have all been modified now by this line 6. And then that's why we see 60, 50, 65, 85, and 105 all printing out from this array. Let's see. We're going to focus on just basic for loops right now. So I would encourage you guys to do all of this just with a basic for loop at this point. Yeah, so there are some other different ways that you can iterate. Generally, I recommend either use the for each method. If you're super comfortable with for loops and you're looking for a challenge, try doing all of this with the for each method that's on the array. So I'd recommend try doing it with that. We will talk about some iteration and stuff with objects, but generally I'd recommend either use this or use for each if you're looking for something more. Like if you're looking for something else to do, if you have some comfort from this, if you have some prior programming experience, or you're coming from a more advanced background, then that's what I would highly recommend. This, if you're familiar with for each, then look at map, and then look at reduce, and then look at filter. Those are really important methods that we cover. Yeah, so yeah, for each, map, reduce, filter, those are all what you use on an array. So it would be like test scores dot for each, and you give it a callback function and stuff like that. But I'm not going to go into that right now. We'll talk about that later this week when we get into functions, functions and methods. That's when we'll be talking about that. So tomorrow and Friday. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, map. You do it on an existing array and it produces a new array. Okay, so all right, so let's see. Someone was asking, I forget who it was. John, that's right. Different ways of declaring empty arrays. So you can do something like, so there's a const array, and you define it like this. This is how you should create your arrays. This is considered widely, like vast majority of companies, this is best practice. You can also do something like that, which, yeah, even this, like the linter is telling me the array literal notation is preferable. So this is how you should do it. If someone tells you to create a new JavaScript array like this, don't do it that way. This is just this shorthand. This is considered the better way to do it. And there are some slight differences with the way the prototypes and stuff are set up, but again, that's a little beyond what we're talking about today. But just write your arrays like this. Okay. All right. Okay, what other questions do you have? I'm gonna double check my notes real quick. let's see. Okay, so yeah, so an array. So again, something here like, so let's say we have a array of names. You know, so we could write names dot push Ben, names dot push Emily, names dot push Ty. Okay, so these are some of our TAs, employees. So we can, you know, dynamically be adding items in like this. Okay. So you might be wondering, all right, so if I create an array like this, what is the difference between writing it like this and if I were to do it like, if I were to do it like this? So like, why would I write it like the second way over this first way? So the answer is, if you know all the items beforehand, write it like this on line 1. Like if you know the items beforehand that are supposed to go in the array, you write them like this. This is how you write an array. The push and pop are used when, as the program is running, you have things that you want to add to an array. That's when you use push and pop and slice and splice. So the so common like case would be, let's say that like if you have a to-do list, if you have a to-do list that's going on inside of your, like we're making a to-do list like web application, and so we would have a user input field and like a submit button, and so the user can type in a new to-do item, and then as they press submit, we have a function, like, you know, so this is our to-dos. Their function is going to give us a new string that we need to push in and add into the array. And at that point in time, we would have a function down below that would be using todos.push. You know, we'd be going todos.push. You know, this would be like, you know, much like, well, just further down in another function, we're going to go todos.push and add in, you know, my new item. So something like that. So that's when push and pop are coming in. So push and pop are when you you know, are adding and changing things in a collection like dynamically during runtime, and runtime means like when your program is actually up and running. So if at the time of writing your code you know everything that's supposed to be in the array, then you write it out just in line. Otherwise, if it's information that you it's impossible to know beforehand before the program actually runs, then you will write it using push and pop and stuff like that. Okay. All right. Okay, so people talking about the const thing again. Yeah, so with const, yeah, just don't reassign the memory address is the main idea. So just don't, the reference can't be changed to point to something else. So what const is protecting against is, let's say I have const some important variable set to some important value. This doesn't need to be camel case, but here. So, you know, like it's whatever this is called, and then let's say that like 1,000 lines down, some other developer comes in, like you're working, like you're on the same team, working on the same project, and they're working on some code, and they're going to say, okay, I'm going to do const some important variable, and then some other important value. So if you were using var, like a linter would catch this, but it's valid, this works. And that's certainly an error. And so it prevents you from accidentally overriding your own variables. That's probably the major use case from this. But yeah, it's to prevent you from accidentally reassigning references when you shouldn't be, because that's generally a bug, and those can be tricky to track down. So const. All right, const and let. Okay. All right, so let's say const nums. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now let's iterate over it backwards. So for let I get 0, I less than nums dot length. This is going left to right real quick, but I'm going to come in and reverse this. So log nums at index I. So we run this. See 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all printed out. So now let's switch this to where we can go the other way. So let's start at 5 and go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what this means is that I needs to start at the end. Instead of I starting at the 0 index, it needs to start at the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 index. So I need to start at 4. We don't want to, let's not hard code that in, because if I change this array or the array is different, then all of a sudden this doesn't work. So we want to start at the right side. So the way that we can conveniently start at the farthest right index is we can say nums.length minus 1. So nums.length will be so the number of items that are in the array. And so because it's 0 index, we just take 1 off of that, and that gives us the index for the last item. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are 6 items in the array. Minus 1 is 5, and then let's look at it. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the correct index for the last item. So we're going to start at the last item, the furthest right item, and then we're going to say while I we say while I is greater than -1. So as soon as this -1 will stop, because I is going to be going the other way, we're going to be doing an I minus minus. While I is greater than or equal to 0, that reads a little better. I think that looks a little bit better. So as soon as I is -1, it's going to break. And then we're going to do I minus minus. If we run that, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from our first for loop. And then we have 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so it runs the other way. So with for loops, we can get fancy and we can come in and we can change that. And there are times where you want to iterate right to left over an array, and you want to change the way that you iterate. Just some random things too, like if we say nums at index 4 or 3, we could set it to like the string foofy or something like that. We can see that gets just assigned. So we can go in and we can just reassign values inside of an array at an index. We can just access it like this. And this is one of the advantages to an array, because we have these indexes. We can very quickly and easily go in and access things in the middle of these arrays. That's one of the advantages to using an array, and one of the trade-offs, and we'll talk about that. And there's other types of lists that we can use, like there's linked lists and doubly linked lists and sets and other types of data structures that give you different advantages. Programming is all about trade-offs, but so anyway, just right now I just wanted to show, like, this is more about just like the syntax. Like we can add an item in. Within JavaScript, arrays can have mixed types. So what that means is that so const array can be, I can say true, array pancakes, null 55 or 555, a function, and an object, and another array. So we can nest arrays inside of each other. And so arrays in JavaScript, you can mix them all up. Generally, this is not recommended. You should try to keep your arrays to a single type of thing. So the best practice is you'll have an array and all the values in there will be of the same type. And so so this is something to avoid. This is legal in JavaScript, but it's generally something to avoid. When you have arrays that have multiple arrays inside of them, this can be what's called a two-dimensional array, and this is how you mimic things like grids, or if you had a three-dimensional array, so arrays nested inside of these. This is how you can mathematically represent, or like in your code, represent like a three-dimensional object. So if you wanted to create some type of like if you're making a game, using a 2D array, you can, using a 2D array, you can mimic you can mimic like a playing board, or you could mimic like your, I don't know, it was like an RTS. You could mimic like a real-time strategy game. You could mimic like the battlefield, and then you could have like pathfinding algorithms for the different units to like move across around the battlefield if you wanted to represent it that way as a two-dimensional array. You could, if you're making a game of chess, like really, if you're making a web application using a game of chess, you would use a two-dimensional array to represent the board. And so right now, with an array of arrays, you can have rows and columns. So right here, we could use these three arrays. It's tricky because it's all being written out on one line, but you can use this to represent like a square. So this right here you could use this to represent a square. This is getting into a little more like advanced stuff, a little more theoretical, a little more. This is beyond what you're going to have to do for your homework tonight. The homework is pretty much just like iteration over arrays, and then practice with some basic array methods. And those are the main things we want you to know coming in. But we'll be doing some stuff like this once you get in. All right, let's see. I've just been avoiding reassignment of content. That's an anti-exclusion though. Cover as a shorthand. Yeah, you want to. Definitely want to avoid reassignment of content. That's something that the linter is usually going to catch anyway. But yeah. So anyway, 2D arrays, fun stuff. Okay. All right. So today's lesson went a little bit faster. It was a little bit easier. The stuff that we're going to cover tomorrow is a little more difficult. And the stuff on Friday is the hardest stuff. The stuff on Friday too is more just like trying to give you some familiarity with the topics, and then you'll master those topics, like those like stuff around functions. You'll master that as we move through the full course, but now it's just more of like an introduction to some of those things, like higher order functions and Lambda functions, callback functions, how to we'll even talk a little bit about recursion and just a lot of stuff related to functions. And there's a lot of interesting things we can do with functions, and a lot of mathematical and programming concepts are built along that idea of a function. So. All right, I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I'll give you guys a second to ask any last questions. And then I'm going to go in and release our next homework assignments. Shorthand ways of accessing first and last items of an array. So easiest way, let's do something else. Let's do So if we have an array and we want to access the last item, this is the best way to dynamically always access. This will always be the last item in the array. So even if I were to add in another item, this right here would now be the bunny. So const last pet. Try to do this. Now we see bunny comes out. See, crocodile eats the bunny. Run that. Now we have dog. So it's the last item. Okay. So this will always give us the last item. So, and if you think about it, the length minus 1, and we use this with our for loop as well. So this will always give us the last item. The first item is much more simple. Index 0. So first item. So we log out the first item and index 0. So index 0 will anyway, this will always be the first item in the array. Let's see. Yeah, so 0 will be the first item. So crocodile. If I were to add in, let's see, what other? Peacock. run that. So peacock, crocodile is still the first item. It doesn't affect it. It's just 0 is always the first one. If I change what the first item is, reindeer. So now reindeer is the first item. So 0 just always gets the first one because the farthest left one is always 0. So 0 is always there on the left. -1. Oh yeah, so -1 is not a valid index. There is nothing at the -1 index. That's undefined. There is no -1 because that's to the left right here. So there is no, like that will be to the left. It's not literally like here, like in the code or looking in the editor. It's just conceptually, it would be to the left of the first item. So 0 is always the first item. There is no -1. Right here, I'm doing pets.length -1. If I were to break that out, I could say const last index is equal to pets.length -1. Put last index right there. And so that's saying the exact same thing as it was before. It's just I'm putting the entire expression inside of there, and that expression is going to be evaluated, and then whatever number it comes out to is what's going to be plugged in right there. So it's not just -1, but it's like 5 - 1 or 4 - 1 or whatever it is. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 - 1. So right here, if I run this, peacock prints out. So still works. Okay. Okay, homework is not up yet for today. So some people are asking about the homework from yesterday. All right. Oh yeah, string of evens. A lot of people are asking about that. So let me just we'll just iterate over that. Okay, there's a couple ways to do this. Some ways are better than others. I'm going over just a very simple, straightforward way. This is the way that you're expected to do right now. So if we have function array, let's see, what is it called? A string of evens. String of evens, and it gets in an array of numbers. So nums is going to be an array of numbers. So string of evens will be invoked down here. This is getting into a little bit of the function syntax. So don't worry about this function part too much right now. We're going to go over this later. But right, or wait, no, it gives you a number that you would iterate up to. That's right. I'm sorry. It's not an array of numbers. So you hadn't gone over arrays yet. It's just giving us a number. So it'll give us a number. Let's say that we'll invoke it with like the number 20. So we'll call the function, get the result back, run it. So this is us invoking the function right here, and then this will be equal to whatever is returned from the function. So this is what the tests are doing this behind the scenes. Okay, so a string of evens. So we have our number. So what we're going to do, again, a couple different ways we can do this, but let's, I'll just say let str be equal to an empty string, and for let I get 0, I less than dot length I plus plus. All right, then what we're going to do is we're going to say if I modulo 2 equals 0, then str plus equal I, and turn str. You might need to start it at a 0. 0 is even, but I think that should, no, 0 modulo 2 equals 0. Yeah, that should equal 0. So yeah, that's equal to 0. So let's run this. Let's see. Oops. All right. Let's see. Nothing printed out. 1 second. Well, now you guys get to see what real programming is like. So real programming is me. Oh yeah, sorry. Out of habit from all the array stuff we're doing. So yep. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Oh, that should be inclusive. So I need to put an equal sign on there. That gives us the 20 on the end. So that's going to give us the entire the entire string. So yeah, so so the number comes in. We create an empty string. We use a let because when we do plus equals, I'm just going to be changing the reference. And then for let I get 0, I less than or equal to num, I plus plus. We start iterating, and then just if we divide the number by 2 and the remainder is equal to 0, then it's an even number. And so 0 is considered an even number. That's why we're starting with 0. Some of you might have seen the problem. I had the description wrong, so I went in to edit it. But I went back and edited it. But yeah, so it's just going to add it together, do string concatenation. So key concepts here, string concatenation, and then like even and odd, like checking their iteration, using let. Let's see, for a reference that will be assigned. Okay. All right, well, we'll be talking a lot about functions and stuff like that, but when we get into some more advanced array methods, there's some ways that that you can do this that looks a little better and is a little more optimal. But this is the solution that that I'm looking for right now from you. This is what I want from you right now. Let's see. When I did this, I ended up using var and not let for string, and turned out you might not work with it. Yeah. So yeah, it would work with var. So if I made this a var, that works fine. If I did this as a var, like it still works. I guess just we want to try to get away from using var. So yeah, force of habit, because usually when you're writing this, you're iterating over an array. But okay, so here's a solution to last night's homework to that problem. A lot of people had questions about it. This one was kind of tricky. Array.forEach. So once you get more experienced in our course, once we're a few weeks in, we tell our students to actually stop using for loops when they're iterating over an array, and they're supposed to use array.forEach. And array.forEach is what we use for everything going forward. But it leads into the concept of a callback function. And so we'll talk about forEach on Friday. We'll be going over forEach quite a bit on Friday. So I'm gonna punt on that one right now, just because I don't want to confuse people, and it will take me longer than a couple minutes to really build up the foundation for introducing that concept. Let's see. Oh yeah, so yeah, you could do just like a plus equal to. So like that works too. Like I, oops, I bumped that thing. So you could do I plus equals 2. That's a that works as well. So that's creative. Yeah, good job. So yeah, going every other one. That's even better, because then you don't have to do this is an even better solution, because then you don't have to check for even and odd, and then you're just skipping all the odd numbers. So yeah, really good job. That's a very creative solution. I like that better. Cool. And then your for loop is only running half as many times too. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Have fun with the homework. I'll be releasing it in just a moment. And then tomorrow we will go over objects. Friday we'll go over functions. And yeah, fun stuff. So thanks, everyone. I will talk to you all later.